Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. A jury could soon deliver a verdict in the Sarah Lawrence College cold case.
The defense has rested, and Larry Ray will not be testifying, so this case is spiraling toward a conclusion.
Plus, 2 high-profile jury selections begin in Florida. What you need to know about the coming trials of Anthony Todt and Nikolas Cruz. Plus, the state calls its final witness in the Olympian attempted murder trial.
I will never, ever forget that moment in time.
But first, officials search for more answers following a deadly mass shooting in Sacramento, California. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. 6 people are killed and 12 more injured following a mass shooting in Sacramento, California. On Monday, police announced a 26-year-old man was arrested in connection to the deadly shooting spree. On Monday, police announced DeAndre Martin was taken into custody. He was charged with assault with a firearm and being a prohibited person in possession of a firearm. Officials also say SWAT members and detectives served warrants following the deadly shooting. The shooting happened early Sunday morning, just blocks from the state capitol building. Officials say a fight broke out near a popular bar and club area. After that, shots rang out. 3 men and 3 women were killed. At least 12 others were injured. In all, more than 100 shots were fired and caught on video. Officials also noted a stolen handgun was recovered from the scene. All this comes just hours after 1 person was killed and 11 more injured at an outdoor concert in Dallas, Texas. Texas investigators are working to determine the number of suspects in that case and have not made any arrests in connection to the deadly shooting. Joining us today is legal analyst Kirk Nurmi and co-host Terry Austin as we discuss these latest mass shootings. Kirk, from the head coach of the Golden State Warriors to the head of the state, President Joe Biden, many have commented on this tragedy, saying that more than thoughts and prayers are needed. What do you think can help curb gun violence like these we're seeing?
Yeah, certainly, Brian. You know, we've seen that thoughts and prayers are certainly not a prevention strategy. Understandable, but they're not preventing these shootings that happen over and over again. What really needs to happen is we need to get serious about access and mental health. Because we see in a case like this, one of the men arrested in this shooting was a prohibited possessor, meaning it was not lawful to him to own a weapon. How did he get that? What laws can change to prevent a person like that from getting that? Getting access to a gun. And then when we move forward, we see these other mass shootings like Mr. Cruz or Mr. Crumbly and these school shootings. We see mental health issues come to the forefront. Why haven't we done more in terms of the mental health aspects of these shootings to try to prevent it, to get those people help before they act out? Those are the kind of strategies that are really going to prevent shootings like this one and ones we've seen in schools recently.
Absolutely. Now, Terry, what investigative steps do you think can be taken in order to find those responsible for these 2 mass shootings, both in Sacramento and Dallas?
Well, we know that the authorities are going to do every single thing that they can to get these people prosecuted. I agree with Kirk, though. We can't do too much. We have to do much more than we've done already. For this particular case, they're going to look at where that fight broke out. They're going to try to identify every single witness who was there. They're going to talk to those people. If you saw something, then you should say something. And I think most importantly, they're going to look at any videos that might have been around and get those clips to determine who was there and who was doing all of the shooting.
We'll, of course, give you updates on both of these deadly shootings as more news comes in through the days continue. An update now on the so-called House of Horrors, as a California foster family is accused of abusing the Turpin family children. A California foster mother, father, and daughter are all charged with sexually and physically abusing 9 children in all, including 5 of the Turpin children. The Turpin family made headlines in 2018 when they were rescued from their biological parents' home. At the time, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin escaped from her house and called 911, reporting that her parents, Dad and Louise Turpin, locked her away along with her 12 siblings. Later, reports detailed torture, malnourishment, and several children being chained to their beds. In 2019, both parents pled guilty to 14 felony counts, including cruelty to a dependent adult, torture, and false imprisonment. A few months after the Turpin children were rescued, they were placed in a California foster home, where more abuse is said to have continued. The Turpin children's foster parents now face several charges, including false imprisonment and child cruelty. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, 2 high-profile jury selections are now underway in the Sunshine State. But first, the state rests its case in the Olympian attempted murder trial. Hear from the state's final witness. Welcome back. The state rests its case in the Olympian attempted murder trial. The state's final witness, the attorney for Lauren Canarak, who was on the phone with his client as she was shot twice in the chest. Former Olympian Michael Barisone faces 2 counts of attempted murder, dating back to the 2019 shooting of Lauren Canarak and shots fired at her boyfriend, Robert Goodwin. At the time, Goodwin and Canarak were dating and lived together on Barisone's property. Defense attorneys say Barisone feared for his life at the time of the shooting and suffered from mental health issues, even sleeping in his stable leading up to the incident. Ahead of the shooting, Barisone was training Canarak in dressage riding as she lived on his property. In the days leading up to the shooting, a string of 911 calls were made by both parties. Barisone saying he was trying to evict Canarak and Canarak saying she was being harassed. On Monday, jurors heard from Canarak's attorney, Edward David, who heard the shooting over the phone.
I heard her say, "Oh my God, there's Barisone. He's got a gun," or something like that. And then I heard what I thought were gunshots. And I said, Lauren, are you okay? I believe she said something like, "He shot me in the heart or the chest." And then I heard the phone drop, and I was obviously in shock. The fact that I heard gunshots is immutable. I heard gunshots. The fact that Lauren said, "I've been shot in the chest," is immutable. I heard that, and it happened. No amount of trauma is going to change that. There are things that, which you reminded me of, there were other things that happened that I now recollect, but I will never, ever forget that moment in time.
Back to break down the latest in the Michael Barisone case as the prosecution rests is legal analyst Kirk Nurmi and Terry Austin. Terry, how do you think the defense started their case? Was this the right or wrong witness to start with?
Well, they started out with a private investigator. I think that was the right witness. They're trying to show 2 things. 1, that it was self-defense. 2, that he was very distraught. And why was he distraught? Because we know that Lauren and Robert Goodman were definitely trying to harass him and bully him. And the private investigator actually was looking into their background. Sadly, though, that was not really allowed into court, and they did not talk about that report. So we'll see whether or not the jury picks up on that. The rest of the defense, I think, was very good as far as showing that he was distraught and that they made complaints against him, and it really hurt his well-being.
Now, Kirk, let's go a little bit back in terms of before the defense put on witnesses. The defense, as they always do and should, asked for dismissal after the prosecution rested. Did the judge do the right thing in saying this case should go to the jury?
Yeah, he did, because when you think about it, Brian, you know, the judge is not there to assess the credibility of the witnesses. That's the job of the jury. In a question like this, when a question like this is put before the judge, his or her job is to decide whether the state has advanced enough evidence to secure a conviction. And really, the testimony of both alleged victims is enough to get to do that. And if we keep in mind, too, the defenses here are affirmative defenses. The defense hasn't really done anything to contradict those facts. They're just saying that they happened, but they were in self-defense or due to insanity. So ultimately, it's pretty clear that the state has met their burden, at least to advance the case to the jury. So the judge made the right call in this situation.
Yeah, it's at least enough for any competent jury to consider the facts and weigh them based on the charges. And like you said, those affirmative defenses are something they're going to be weighing as well. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, both sides rest in the Sarah Lawrence College sex cult federal trial. Plus, we're taking a closer look at jury selection in 2 high-profile Florida cases. What to expect in the trials of Nikolas Cruz and Anthony Todt. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Jury selection begins for the highly anticipated sentencing phase of Parkland school shooter Nikolas Cruz. A jury will soon decide whether the 23-year-old should be sentenced to the minimum of life in prison or receive the death penalty. Cruz pled guilty in October of last year for the deadly Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. That's where in February of 2018, Cruz opened fire, killing 17 people and injuring 17 more. 12 jurors and 8 alternates will be chosen from a pool of more than 1,500 people. Cruz will only receive the death penalty if the jury unanimously agrees that aggravating factors like the cruelty and planning of the act outweigh mitigating factors such as mental illness or the death of his parents. If one juror disagrees, Cruz will not receive the death penalty. Last week, attorneys from both sides indicated the sentencing phase could stretch from 4 to 6 months. Law&Crime Daily is set to bring you live coverage when the penalty phase begins. Also in Florida, jury selection begins in the case of Anthony Todt, a man accused of murdering his wife, 3 young children, and family dog, not far from Disney World. Federal authorities found Todt's wife, 2 sons, daughter, and the family dog dead in their Celebration, Florida home in early 2020. Officials were there to arrest the physical therapist on unrelated insurance fraud charges when the bodies were discovered. In a jailhouse letter to his father, Todt claimed his wife was to blame for the killings. When Todt was arrested, he said he had taken Benadryl in an attempt to commit suicide. The judge previously ruled to allow one confession from Todt, but exclude another after detectives failed to fully inform him of his Miranda rights. Last week, a judge ruled Todt's mental health issues could not be included in the defense's case. Stay with Law&Crime Network for gavel-to-gavel coverage of the case. Live coverage begins with opening statements. Legal analyst Kirk Nurmi and co-host Terry Austin join us again as we tackle jury selection in 2 major Florida cases. Terry, let's start with Todt. This case has changing stories, a confession, then part of the confession gets thrown out, and Todt now says his wife did it. So how do you nail down a defense when your client can't be clear as to what happened?
You know, this is going to be a very difficult defense for this defendant because his story changes. And I think what we're going to have to see from the attorney, they're going to have to pick a theory, they're going to have to stick with that theory. And the theory is what he wrote to his father in that letter from prison. And they're going to have to argue that when he's talking to his father, he's telling the truth. And he's saying, look, the wife did it. She killed her kids. She killed herself. It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. And they're going to have to say that this confession was something that was not a real confession, that it was forced upon him, and he was just upset at the time, and he was taking blame for it. So they're going to have to explain that away. It's going to be very hard because it looks like all of the evidence right now points directly to him, and it doesn't seem as though there is any evidence as far as suicide is concerned.
Yeah, and what's even more difficult, a lot of the points that you're making, Terry, sound like points that can only come from him, so maybe he's got to take the stand. I don't know. We'll see when it comes up. Kirk, let's switch now to Cruz. Short of just being against the death penalty, do you think there's a juror who says Cruz doesn't deserve the death penalty, and how much weight do you think a jury should give to the fact that he admitted his guilt?
Well, ultimately, Brian, I think there's a difficulty in finding jurors like that. That's why we see that they pulled 1,500 people. But in order to be lawful, a juror has to be open to both penalties, has to be open to death, and has to be open to life. So we're going to see the jurors be given questionnaires in order to assess that. And Brian, I've selected juries in death penalty cases, high-profile ones, and ultimately, it's different for those jurors when they're in the courtroom versus when they're talking about the death penalty with their friends, so it takes on a whole new light. And they're going to be asked, can they give consideration to the mitigating factors put forward, any of them? And they're going to have to be able to say yes in order to be seated as a jury. So it's going to be a long process, it's going to be a tough process, but I think ultimately they're going to find the 20 or so jurors they need. It's just going to take a while.
Absolutely, and we'll be there as it takes a while. As 2 trials begin, a third is nearing the finish line as closing arguments are set to be presented in the trial of ex-ICU doctor William Husel. Both sides rested last week in a case Law&Crime Network has brought you gavel-to-gavel live coverage of. Husel's accused of murdering 14 patients while practicing medicine as an ICU doctor at Mount Carmel St. Anne's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Prosecutors say Husel gave deadly amounts of fentanyl to multiple patients, resulting in their murders. Defense attorneys counter saying Husel was providing end-of-life care. After more than 50 prosecution witnesses and weeks of testimony, the state rested its case last week. Famed defense attorney Jose Baez called only one witness to the stand. Both sides are expected to present closing arguments on Tuesday. Make sure to watch the Law&Crime Network for live coverage and up-to-the-minute developments in the case. When we come back, both sides rest in the Sarah Lawrence College federal trial. Law and Crime Network's Adam Klasfeld brings us the latest developments from the federal courthouse in New York. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. A federal judge rules that guilty conviction will stand for former socialite Ghislaine Maxwell. Co-host Terry Austin joins us now to explain why Maxwell will not receive a new trial.
Brian, on Friday, federal judge Allison Nathan ruled that Maxwell does not deserve a new trial based on alleged jury misconduct. This comes after Maxwell's defense pushed for a new trial, saying juror number 50 did not act as a fair and impartial juror in the highly publicized trial. On the jury questionnaire filled out ahead of the trial, the juror known as Scotty David indicated he had not been sexually assaulted. But during deliberations and post-trial interviews, David revealed that he had been sexually assaulted as a child. During questioning under oath, David told Judge Nathan he was distracted and he quickly filled out the questionnaire. Maxwell's defense team argued that the admission was grounds to vacate the jury's guilty verdict, while federal prosecutors say that David made an honest mistake. Judge Nathan later determined it was, quote, highly unfortunate but not deliberate that David failed to disclose his history of sexual assault. Maxwell was convicted on multiple counts in December of last year relating to sex trafficking and grooming of young girls. Prosecutors say Maxwell helped recruit underage girls for her companion, the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell is scheduled to be sentenced in June. She faces up to 65 years in prison. Brian?
Also in federal court, both sides rest in the case of accused Sarah Lawrence sex cult leader Lawrence Ray. This after the defense began and ended arguing its case with just 2 witnesses taking the stand. Ray is facing a possible life sentence on a 17-count indictment of federal charges, including racketeering, sex trafficking, and tax evasion, among others. The charges all stem from alleged crimes dating back to 2010, when Ray allegedly started the Ray family, a cult made up of his daughter and her Sarah Lawrence college friends. Throughout the prosecution's case, jurors heard from Ray's alleged victims, including 3 siblings, Santos, Felicia, and Yulitza Rosario, and their mother. Also among his alleged victims is Claudia Jury, who testified about becoming a sex worker at Ray's urging. She told the jury about giving him the money she earned while engaging in sex work. On Monday morning, the defense called its first witness, a cell site data expert who was called to rebut earlier testimony about cell phone locations of Jury and Ray's co-defendant, Isabella Pollock. Their second and final witness was Ray's former attorney, who the defense claims gave Ray advice to take the money from Jury. They say it was restitution after Ray believed Jury tried to poison him. Law and Crime's Adam Klasfeld has been inside the courtroom watching the story unfold. He joins us now as the defense presents its short case.
Folks I've spoken to have said this is just a Hail Mary pass by the defense. And let's put it into perspective. Their 17-count indictment, this entire defense goes to a couple of charges of tax evasion. To go into what the testimony was, it was downright bizarre. The lawyer, Mr. Ripa, had testified that he did not preserve any billing records. He noted that Ray paid in cash. On cross-examination, the prosecutors made a point that he didn't have any kind of outside corroboration, any medical records that Drury, in fact, poisoned Mr. Ray. When asked if he had heard that Ray was accused of forcing her into prostitution, he replied, absolutely not. So the crux of the defense here is Ray supposedly believing that it was authorized on advice of counsel to take money from Claudia Drury's prostitution to repay restitution for the supposed poisoning. Larry Ray will not be testifying, so this case is spiraling toward a conclusion.
Kirk, Ripa's testimony sounded horrible for the defense, and of course it did. No lawyer is telling their client to force someone into sex work to pay their debts. Did the witness crush this defense's chance of a victory?
Well, exactly, Brian, you're right. no attorney is going to give that advice. And know that there's no chance of victory to crush here, Brian. The evidence is so strong. There's no real defense to any of this. So I think what we really have is a long-form guilty plea. This trial is not only winding down, but winding towards a conviction that I think the jury will reach very quickly.
Absolutely. Terry, Isabella Pollack allegedly filmed some of the damaging videos. She's being tried separately. What do you think the case against her will look like?
Well, they're alleging that she is his accomplice. And frankly, this reminds me a lot of the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell case, where she was his accomplice. And she apparently was there filming all of this. Who knows, maybe she was actually grooming some of the individuals who were victims here. And the evidence is so clear. It is certainly, like Kirk said, this is something that I think the jury is going to determine very quickly. And when the case against Pollack happens, I think her verdict will be quick as well.
Absolutely. Thank you both for joining us. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.